Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. I'm excited about the topic for today. It's exercise, and we're not talking about exercise as punishment or a cosmetic project, not as an extreme athletic pursuit, but as one of the most effective tools that we have to preserve health and function and independence as we age. When people hear the word longevity, they often think about simply living longer. But the more important question is this: what kind of life do you want to be able to live over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years? What do you want to be able to travel comfortably and keep up with family, stay active, recover well, remain independent? That's really what tonight is about. If I had to summarize this talk in one sentence, it would be this. Exercise really is the closest thing that we have to a true longevity drug. So just an outline of the session. And to put it into context, this is a series of 7 talks. Session 1 was health as a foundation, followed by longevity medicine and what actually works. Last time we did nutrition and metabolism. This session is exercise. Next we'll do stress, sleep, cognitive health. Then we'll talk about the frontiers in longevity medicine, what we see coming next. And then we'll talk about building a personal longevity plan. So this slide makes a strong claim, and I think that it really is justified. Exercise acts like medicine. It improves metabolic health, supports blood sugar, lowers inflammation, benefits brain health, preserves muscle and bone, and lowers the risk of many chronic diseases. Most medications do one or two things. Exercise improves the function of the whole system. It helps make the body more capable. One of the most useful ways to think about aging is not just the appearance of disease, but as the gradual loss of reserve and function. Everyday tasks become more tiring. Recovery takes longer. Small setbacks hit harder. Exercise helps preserve that reserve. And it's a major reason why it matters so much. This slide highlights an important point. Higher fitness levels are associated with better long-term outcomes. That matters because exercise is often treated as a weight loss tool or an appearance issue, when in reality, it's much more than that. Fitness is one of the strongest predictors we have for how well people do over time. And it's not about vanity, it's about resilience, function, and long-term health. Low fitness is a real risk factor, and improving fitness can meaningfully change the trajectory. That's encouraging because it means people are not simply stuck with the path they're on. This is one of the most encouraging slides of the presentation. The main takeaway is that the biggest gains often come from moving from sedentary to doing something. So not a lot of effort. You don't need to become elite. You don't need a perfect program. A brisk walk counts, a bike ride counts, basic strength routines count, and consistency counts. This is important because many people delay getting started and they assume that unless they can commit to something ambitious, there's no point. But the body responds well when you move from inactivity to regular activity. The goal is not extreme exercise, but to stop being sedentary and start building momentum. If you look at this figure, on the y-axis, we have risk of early death, and on the x-axis, minutes of walking per week, simply walking. And you can see in that red shaded area, we're just talking about increasing activity to 5 minutes of walking per day, somewhere around 50 minutes per week, and it reduces mortality risk by 8%. If you increase that to 20 minutes on most days, that's almost a 25% reduction in the risk of early death. So it really is impactful. So doing anything matters, but how you exercise also matters. If we start looking at increasing the level of intensity and adding in some mixed training, you get another significant improvement in lowering the risk of early death. And you can see that on this figure here. The green line is the benefit from walking. The blue line is the benefit from mixed training, mixing in strength training, high intensity interval training, balance and mobility training, and of course, zone 2 training. And we'll talk about these here in a moment in more detail. So this slide lays out the 4 pillars of an exercise program. The foundation is zone 2, your aerobic base. This builds cellular health, mitochondrial density, which enhances fat oxidation, improves endurance. We'd like people to do 3 or 4 sessions of this a week. High intensity interval training, or HIIT training, really pushes that upper limit of what you can do. It improves your VO2 max, which we'll define here shortly. It promotes cardiovascular remodeling in a beneficial way. We look for people to do 1 to 2 sessions per week, with the caveat that some people cannot because they have some physical limitations or comorbid disease, which means that they really shouldn't be exercising to those extremes. And so if you're going to engage in high intensity interval training, it really should be with the guidance or okay from your physician. Strength training preserves muscle mass and increases bone density. It maintains functional capacity. 2 or 3 sessions a week are ideal. Lastly, stability and mobility are really important. This reduces injury risk, it improves balance, and supports independent daily living as you get older. Think of this as tripping on something and catching yourself before you fall to the ground. Really essential abilities as you get older. When we're younger, we don't think about that so much. So a little bit more about each of these components. So zone 2 training, this is your aerobic foundation, sustainable aerobic exercise. When you think about how hard you're working here, you're clearly working, but it's not all out. You can still talk, but not effortlessly. Again, this kind of training builds that aerobic base. It improves endurance, metabolic health, fuel efficiency, and overall resilience. This is something that's sustainable enough or low enough intensity that you can do it regularly. For many people, this could be brisk walking, incline walking, cycling, rowing, swimming, or an easy jog. It doesn't look dramatic, but it's really one of the quiet workhorses of healthy aging. It builds long-term health value. VO2 max and high intensity interval training. So just a word on this. So VO2 max is one of the most important concepts of this talk. Excuse me. In simple terms, it's a measure of aerobic fitness. It reflects how well your heart and your lungs and your circulation, along with your muscles, work together during exertion. In everyday life, this matters because it reflects how much reserve you have. If your reserve gets too low, normal activities start to feel harder than they should. Stairs feel harder, travel feels harder, walking uphill feels harder, recovering from illness feels harder. So VO2 max is not just a number for athletes, it's a practical indicator of capacity and resilience. So this slide explains a little bit more about VO2 max. When we think about that number, it's something that you can measure in a lab. Doing those measurements is challenging. It involves an all-out effort on a treadmill or a bike. So yes, challenging, it certainly is. You only want to do this if you are if you have an okay from your healthcare provider. They say you're fit enough to do this, healthy enough to do this, and it should be supervised by somebody who's skilled. What that number actually means is it's the amount of oxygen that your body can use per minute. And we normalize it to your body weight. So the things that have to be working in order to achieve a good VO2 max number are the following. You have to be cognitively intact. You have to be neuromuscularly intact, meaning your brain has to be able to communicate to your body so that it can move in an efficient way. You have to have a healthy heart for good cardiac output. You have to have healthy lungs for gas exchange. You have to have a healthy peripheral vascular system to bring that oxygen and those nutrients to your muscles. And then you have to have the fitness also. So because of those reasons, because it ties all of that physiology together, it's one of the strongest predictors of all-cause mortality. It measures the whole system, not just one system. Now, when we think about measuring it in other ways than just the lab, you certainly can get an estimate from wearable watches like an Apple Watch or a Garmin watch. And that's a reasonable measure. There is some error in those, but it's certainly good for trending over time. When we think about mortality risk and correlate that with VO2 max, I mean, it's tightly correlated precisely because of those reasons that I explained earlier, because it involves the whole system and the whole system's health. For people who have low VO2 max, they have 5 times the risk of early mortality or early death. At the other end of the spectrum, elite performers whose VO2 max is up in the 97th percentile have about half the risk of early mortality. So it really is something that reflects your overall wellness and can be a marker of your longevity. We know that as we age, VO2 max and aerobic capacity decline. It declines about 10% per decade. This is age-related, starts about after 30 years old. It can have an impact on independence if it drops low enough. Preventing this from occurring to the point that you lose your independence involves activity and exercise and training. Training is the countermeasure against this. So this decline is, it happens, but declining to that worrisome level is not unavoidable. Regarding aging, people oftentimes think that they're slowing down purely because of age. But in reality, in many cases, what they're also experiencing are the effects of moving less and training less and challenging the body less. Aging is real, but underuse is real too, and they're not the same thing. What a lot of people think of as normal aging is actually compounded by loss of fitness over time. So this is important because it means more of the story is modifiable than many people assume. So what about functional independence and thresholds with VO2 max? So if your VO2 max drops below 20 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per minute, you really start to have significant impacts on your normal activities, to the point that you're likely to require a caregiver and somebody to help you do your normal activities, such as cooking, cleaning, laundry, climbing stairs, etc. You're going to have limited ability to get out of the house and do normal activities that you enjoy. If you're above 25, that's, we're talking about the bare minimum to get up and about and do those normal activities. But really, you want to push it a little bit higher than that so that you've got functional reserve. This is just an example of an exercise protocol that can boost VO2 max. It's called a Norwegian 4x4. It involves a warm-up and then 4 intervals of 4 minutes at almost your max heart rate, with a 3-minute active recovery in between the intervals, then a 5-minute cool down. Total session's about 35 minutes. And if you're doing this a couple of times a week, that's ideal. That said, you should really only embark on such an activity or an exercise protocol if your physician signs off on you being fit enough and healthy enough to do so, because it is quite stressful on your cardiovascular system. But if that's okay, if you're well enough to be able to do this, it really will raise the ceiling of your aerobic capacity. So for the right person, used appropriately, this high intensity work can be very effective, but use it thoughtfully. So what about our third pillar, strength training? So this is a very important part of aging well. Muscle's not just cosmetic, it's functional, it's protective, it's metabolically important. It helps control blood sugar, supports joints, preserves bone, improves balance, and makes everyday tasks easier. It helps determine if you can carry, lift, climb, rise up from a chair, or recover from an injury or illness. One of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking strength is only for younger adults or serious athletes. In reality, strength becomes more important as we age, not less important. So we do tend to lose muscle and strength as we age, more so if muscle maintenance is not attended to. This affects balance and mobility, metabolism, fall risk, injury recovery, resilience. The decline is gradual, so oftentimes people don't really notice it. They just start finding that certain things are harder than they used to be. Strength training is one of the best ways to resist that drift and preserve useful function. So again, just to emphasize this, what does strength training do for us and why is it important? Fall reduction, lower injury rates, fracture prevention, boosting bone density, and then that optimal strategy is really about, so this requires a little bit of explanation. If you think about the maximum that you can lift one time, you're aiming to do about 80 to 85% of that with repetitions during compound movements. And we'll talk about what those are shortly. When you get to about 5 of those repetitions, then you can increase the amount of resistance. This can be done with free weights or bands. There's a number of ways to implement this sort of a regimen. So again, how do we do this? 2 to 3 times per week, 2 to 3 sets with each exercise. Progressive overload. Again, you increase resistance when you can complete 5 repetitions. And the focus areas want to be things like squats or deadlifts, lifting things up from the ground. Presses like wall push-ups or knee push-ups or regular push-ups if you're stronger, rows, things of this nature. Ideally, you have a personal trainer who can introduce you to the movements and the exercises and help you learn to do them safely in a way that's not going to overload your body and not going to cause injury. The fourth pillar is building stability and mobility. This involves balance training, both static and dynamic and also reactive. Think about that tripping on something and catching yourself before you fall to the ground. Mobility work, and then integrating them both together is really helpful. Again, having a personal trainer who can introduce modalities and ways to do this is really helpful. This is a really fun idea, the centenarian decathlon. The idea that you're training for activities that you want to be able to perform when you're 90 to 100 years old. These are not necessarily athletic endeavors, but simple things that matter when you're that age. And you can make up your own list. It's whatever you want it to be. But here's some suggestions. Get up off the floor unassisted. Carry groceries upstairs. Walk several miles. Step onto a high curb, and so on. They're not, we're not talking about running a marathon here. We're talking about things that allow you to enjoy life and get out and do these independent activities that are worthwhile. And we address this, or we introduce this to your exercise program by thinking about this backcast approach. So you define your vision with that centenarian decathlon and the things that you want. You just pick these 10 things that you want to prioritize. You think about what your life wants to look like then. You identify your capacities now. What are your fitness levels and where they need to be in the future? And then you build reserve so that as you are aging, you're fighting against those age-related declines, so that once you hit those advanced ages, 90 years old plus, you have that capacity. And then annually, or even more often, you reassess. You readjust your efforts based on your progress and make corrections as you need. So here's just an example of a weekly framework. I put this here not because this is the ideal plan for anybody, and not because somebody necessarily needs to do 3.5 to 4 hours of aerobic and 2 hours of strength and 1 hour of stability and mobility work. I mean, that's a lot. But because it's important to think proactively about this, prioritize it, and come up with an active plan. It's much easier to adhere to that way. And again, consistency over time is what matters, not perfection. And so having something written down and having something that you can refer to on a weekly basis, so you know exactly what you're going to do, so you can allocate time to it, is really important. So that's my take on exercise. It's brief and focused, but I think that it highlights the importance of exercise and how we should really think about it as medicine and one of the most powerful tools that we have to impact our health over the long run. Thanks very much.